There is a small insect that cannot live on human skin. It lives in the seams of clothing, not on the body, in the cloth. It rests in the fold of the seam, it lays its eggs there, and it comes onto the skin only to feed. Put it on bare skin and leave it there, and it will not make a life of it. It has nothing to hold and nowhere at all to put its eggs, which means something quiet and enormous. This animal could not have existed before there was clothing for it to live in. Its entire world is a thing that people made with their hands. So it is a receipt. Something that small has been keeping the date of the day humans got dressed, and keeping it inside its own body, where a record cannot be mislaid or quietly rewritten. That is where we are going tonight, slowly and in order. Let your shoulders come down, and let your jaw come unset. Then stay close, because this has a shape, and the shape is the pleasure of it. The date turns out to be astonishingly recent. And the reason we needed clothing at all, the loss of our fur, turns out to be astonishingly old. Between those two facts sits a gap of an almost absurd size. That gap is the mystery. So there are 3 questions, and I want you holding all 3 at once. When did we lose the fur? Why did we lose it? And how could anyone possibly know the day we covered ourselves back up? Start with the animal itself, because it deserves accuracy rather than a shudder. It is small, about the length of a sesame seed, pale and flattened and close to the colour of whatever cloth it is sitting in. 6 legs. Each leg ends in a curved claw that closes against a small stub, roughly the way your thumb closes against the side of your finger. That claw is the hinge of this entire story. It is not a general-purpose hook, and that is precisely the point of it. It is sized. It shuts well around one particular thickness of fibre and badly around anything else. That makes it less like a grasping hand and more like a gauge. A body built to hold a thread. Then there are the eggs, and the eggs are where the argument really lives. She does not scatter them loose. She cements them on one at a time, each egg fixed to a single fibre. The glue sets hard, and it does not release in water, which means she needs a surface that will still be there next week, anchored and patient, holding the same shape in the same place. The young hatch where they were left, and they feed within hours. They never travel far from the fold they were born in. 3 generations can pass inside a single garment without anything important happening more than an inch away. Before we go further, I want to know where you are right now. Not in general terms, right now at whatever hour this has found you. Maybe it is early where you are, and the city is Berlin, grey light at the window, something hot in a cup, the day not properly started yet. Maybe it is the far end of the day instead. Vancouver, long past midnight, the room dark, the street outside finally gone quiet. Or maybe it is the middle of everything, and you are in Melbourne on a lunch break, headphones on, with half an hour that belongs to nobody else. Wherever that is, you have one thing in common with everybody else listening tonight. You are wearing something. A sleeve, a waistband, a sock, a collar, a sheet pulled up as far as the shoulder, and in every one of those, without exception, there is a seam. Find one now, without really moving. Run a thumb along the outer edge of your sleeve, and you will feel a ridge there, thicker and firmer than the cloth on either side of it. There is another at your shoulder, one at the waist, and one across the toes of a sock. That ridge is not quite fabric anymore. It is architecture. Think about what a seam actually is. 2 layers of cloth are folded together and stitched through. The material doubles and stiffens and forms a narrow channel with a roof over the top of it. It holds its shape long after the rest of the garment has gone slack. It traps warmth. It sits still against the body while the loose cloth around it lifts and falls against you all day long. For something the size of a seed, that is not a wrinkle in a shirt. It is a corridor with walls and a ceiling, and a heat source living permanently next door. Everything she requires is stacked into that one narrow place, shelter above and warmth below, and food a short walk away. No other animal on earth has quite that arrangement, because no other animal on earth is furnished and heated and carried about by us. Skin cannot offer any of that. Your own skin is warm, certainly, and warmth is half of what she needs. But skin is soft, and skin moves, and skin renews itself constantly, shedding its outer layer away without ever being asked to. There is nothing on you to cement an egg to that will still be holding a week later. Nothing to grip that does not slide out from under the grip. So the division is absolute, in a way that very little else in biology manages to be. Skin is where she eats. Cloth is where she lives. Take the cloth away and she has no world left at all, only a meal and then nothing after it, which is exactly why she is so useful to us. She is not a common companion now. She needs conditions that most lives no longer offer, cloth worn continuously without change and without washing, season after season. Across much of the world she has become a rarity. None of that is really the point of her here. Here she is not a nuisance, and not a shame, and not a joke. She is an instrument, and she is pointed backward, at us. Every clue in this story turns out to be like that, small, sideways, and left behind by something that was not trying to leave a clue at all. Here is the rule, and it is a simple one to keep hold of. An animal that can only live inside an invention cannot possibly be older than the invention. Its beginning is fenced in by ours, on both sides, whether it knows that or not. So the arrival of this insect is not really a fact about insects. It is a fact about us. It is a piece of our own history written down from the outside by something with no interest whatsoever in writing anything down, and we needed it written down somewhere, because almost nothing else from that moment survived. The first clothes were not made of stone. They were hide and sinew and plant fibre, soft things, and soft things rot. They go back into the ground within a few wet seasons and leave nothing behind worth finding. Fabric survives only in freak conditions, in dry caves or waterlogged ground or ice, and all of those are rare and late. Everything older is simply absent from the record, not because people wore nothing, but because whatever they wore did not last. Bone lasts. Bone will tell you the width of a shoulder and the length of a stride, and roughly how old the person was who walked on it. Bone will tell you nothing at all about whether that shoulder was covered. So here was one of the largest questions we can ask about ourselves, with no evidence attached to it anywhere in the ground. And then somebody thought to look at the animal living in the seam. What she has to say about the date we will come to properly, because it deserves the time. There is a number waiting at the end of all this. Honestly, it is not one number, but a spread. Because different people reading the same evidence by different methods land in different places. I would rather hand you the real spread than a clean answer that is partly invented. So hold that question open, because it keeps better that way. It is the third of the three, the one about how anyone could possibly know, and the whole answer to it is an insect the length of a seed. because the other half of the mystery is stranger still, and far older, and it is not in your wardrobe at all. It is on you. Right now, under everything you are wearing, quietly doing its work in the dark. You are, by the ordinary standards of the animal world, a genuinely odd creature. You have skin that shows. Almost nothing of your size and kind does that. The few animals that manage it have particular reasons, and we will look at them one at a time. The usual way of describing this is to say that we lost our hair somewhere along the way. The usual way of describing it is wrong, and you can check that for yourself on your own forearm in about 10 seconds. There is more waiting after that, because there is a cooling system running quietly on you tonight, of a kind that no other primate has anything close to, and we are going to spend real time on it. There is a reason behind the whole arrangement that has to do with open country, and with distance, and with what happens in the middle of the day. And there is a second clock entirely, written in pigment rather than in insects, which does not date the clothing at all. It dates the fur. It lands very much further back than any seam could ever reach. That gap between the two clocks is the shape of everything I want to show you. So sit with the size of it for a moment before we go on. Somewhere deep in the past our ancestors stopped being covered, and then lived bare, skinned under an open sky for an enormous stretch of time, needing nothing over them at all. That stretch is not a footnote to the story. It is most of the story, and nearly everything we picture when we picture human life is crowded into the thin end of it. Then, comparatively recently, we covered ourselves back up. Not everywhere, not all at once. But once we did, something moved into the fold of the cloth and stayed there, generation after generation, holding the receipt for us the whole time. Nobody asked it to. It simply could not have arrived any earlier than we did. None of that begins with the cloth, though. All of it begins with the body underneath the cloth, and with a change so complete and so old that we stopped being able to see it at all. So start with the part you can check yourself, right where you are lying. Push your sleeve back a little. Turn your forearm toward whatever light is nearest, and hold it there, and look at it properly for once. Not at the skin, at what is standing on it. So before we go anywhere near that seam, and before we can ask when, we have to be honest about what we are actually looking at. Because the word naked is wrong, and it has been wrong the whole time. Look at your arm, not a glance, turn it over. Hold the inside of your forearm up toward the nearest light, a lamp or a screen or the last grey of a window. Let the light come across it, low and sideways, rather than straight down onto it. Now tilt it slowly, and wait for it. There, fine hairs. Dozens of them. Then hundreds once your eye adjusts. They lie almost flat against your skin. They are pale, and they are so slender that in ordinary light they are simply not there. Under a low light at the right angle they catch, and the whole surface of your forearm goes faintly silver, like a field seen from very far away. That is your coat. You have been wearing it all day. Now put a number beside it. A human being has very roughly as many hair follicles in a square inch of skin as a chimpanzee does. Roughly the counts shift with the part of the body and with the method of counting. But the headline holds, and it is one of the strangest facts about the body you are resting in. We did not lose the follicles. They are still there. Millions of them, laid out in close to the same density our nearest relatives carry. What changed is what comes out of them. A chimpanzee grows what is called terminal hair, thick, long, dark, pigmented the whole way down. It grows for a long stretch before it rests, so it reaches real length. Put enough of it side by side and it becomes a coat, and a coat is a remarkable piece of equipment. It traps a layer of still air against the skin and holds warmth in that layer, and still air is one of the best insulators there is. It sheds rain, takes the sun off the back and the scrape off the shoulder. Across almost all of you, the follicles are making the other kind. Vellus hair. Short, fine, and carrying almost no pigment. It grows a little way and then it stops. It never gets long enough to lean on its neighbours, and it is far too thin to hold that layer of air. So the coat is still being made. It is simply being made out of something you cannot see. That correction has to come before anything else, because it changes the shape of the whole question. We are not a bald ape. Baldness would mean the follicles had closed and gone quiet, and ours did not close. We are an ape whose coat turned invisible, and what happened to us was not the removal of the machinery. It was a change in what the machinery makes. You kept the old kind in a few places. The scalp, where it grows on and on with almost no limit. The brows, which throw rain and light away from the eyes, and the lashes with them. A scattering elsewhere that differs from one person to the next. More here, less there, and means nothing whatever about anybody. Everywhere else, the fine kind. Arms, legs, shoulders, back, the tops of your hands. Look at the back of your hand now, in that same low light, and the same faint silver is waiting there. And we all grew a proper coat once, briefly, before we ever saw daylight. In the womb a human grows a soft fine hair over almost the whole body, and then sheds it, mostly before being born. A coat put on and taken off again in the dark. The pattern for the ape we came from is still filed away in us, we simply no longer run it. Hold on to that, because it is what makes the question of the seam so sharp. Something very small, living only in cloth, has been keeping a date for us. But a date for what? We cannot ask when a body first needed covering until we know what that body had stopped producing. Now we know. Not the follicles, the coat. And now the strangeness, which is far larger than it first sounds. Hair is not an accessory that mammals happen to have. It is close to the definition of the group. Milk and hair are the two things that mark the whole class out, and hair is the one you can read from across a field. There are more than 6,000 kinds of mammal alive on the earth right now, and nearly every one of them is covered. Run through the ones you can picture. A mouse in a hedge, a bat folded up under a roof, a red deer standing in wet grass at first light, a bear walking a shoreline unhurried, a seal hauled out on a rock, still shining, its fur pushed flat and dark by the water. A horse, and if you have ever laid a hand on the neck of a horse, you know the feel of it, warm and short and dense under the palm. Every one of them covered, which is the ordinary condition of a mammal on this planet, and we are standing outside it. There are exceptions, and there are not many of them. This is the part worth sitting with, because every exception comes with a reason attached, and the reason can be read straight off the animal. Start in the water, where whales and dolphins are bare, and the reason is that fur stops working the moment it is wet. A coat holds heat by keeping still air in among the hairs. Push it under and the air is gone, and what is left is a soaked layer that carries warmth away instead of keeping it. Water pulls heat out of a body many times faster than air does. So the whales moved the coat inside, blubber beneath the skin where nothing can flatten it, and an outside gone smooth, which also lets a very large animal slip through water with less to pull at it. Watch a dolphin rise, roll and go under again, and nothing on it catches. Hippos are nearly bare for much the same reason, and a walrus keeps only the sparsest covering. Water is the first reason, and it is clear enough to point at. Now go up in size. An elephant is bare, or close to it, with thick skin, thin hairs scattered over it, and nothing that counts as a coat, and a rhinoceros is the same. The reason here is arithmetic, and it runs the opposite way round from what it sounds. Make a body bigger, and its volume grows faster than its surface. Heat is made throughout that volume, and all of it has to leave through that surface. A very large animal in a warm country is not struggling to hold heat in. It is working, all day and quietly, to get heat out. A coat would be the last thing it wants. So an elephant carries its own answers instead. Ears like two great fans, thin and threaded with vessels, held out and moved slowly in the warm air. Skin folded and ridged so that it holds water longer after a wade, dust thrown up over the back with the trunk, and cool mud worn like a garment it puts on rather than grows. Even the sparse hairs it keeps may help it shed heat rather than hold it. Big, calm and bare for a reason written into its own dimensions. Then go down into the dark. The naked mole rat spends its whole life in tunnels under dry ground in East Africa, in a colony of dozens, and it is among the barest mammals there is. A tunnel is a room with the temperature already set. Down there the air barely moves and the warmth barely changes, and a heap of bodies sleeping together supplies whatever is missing. A coat below ground is luggage, and it would only drag on the walls of a passage cut to the width of the animal. What it does keep is a scatter of long single hairs standing out from the body, used the way fingertips are used in a dark hallway, brushing the walls, reading the tunnel by touch. And pigs, the softest case of the four. A pig is not truly bare, it keeps bristles, spread thin over pale or grey skin. What it does not have is a working coat, and a pig cannot cool itself the way you can, though that is the next thing, and I am running ahead of myself. So it does what the elephant does. It finds water or cool mud, lies down in it, and wears the coolness. Add long centuries of breeding for barns, and it goes barer still. It is heat again, handled from the outside. Water, size, the tunnel. 3 reasons, and every bare mammal on that list holds one of them. Now hold that list up against yourself. You are not aquatic. Your ancestors did not pass their days in water. There is no blubber under your skin doing what it does for a dolphin, and the shape of you is not built to slip through anything at all. You are not huge. You are a middle-sized animal, and a middle-sized animal in the open has the ordinary heat problem, not the elephant's. You do not live underground. You are not shaped in a tunnel where the temperature never moves, and you are not warm on your own. Take the cloth off tonight, sit in a room at an ordinary temperature, and within the hour you will be cold. A chimpanzee in that same room would be perfectly comfortable. That is the problem, and it is worth saying plainly. Every other bare mammal traded its coat for something obvious. Blubber, bulk, a burrow or a wallow. We took ours off in open country, at ordinary size, on dry land, and at first glance appear to have been handed nothing in return. An animal that gets cold in a mild room has given up something it plainly needed, and nothing in nature gives away a working coat for free. There is always a payment, and the payment is usually easy to find. This time it is not, which means we were handed something. And we were. It is on you right now, in the skin beneath those fine hairs, in numbers that are genuinely hard to believe, and that is where we go next. After it comes the open ground and the middle of the day, and why an animal that can keep moving when everything else has stopped might be worth building. There is a way of dating all of this written into the colour of skin. There are rival explanations that deserve a hearing rather than a wave of the hand. And far out at the end, the seam and the small patient insect holding the receipt. But first, the skin itself. Turn your forearm back into the light one more time, and this time look past the hairs, at the surface between them. Losing a coat is a subtraction, and subtractions are easy enough to picture. The stranger half of this belongs to whatever arrived in its place. Because something was added, it was added everywhere, in a number that is difficult to hold in the mind, and it is working right now, quietly, underneath whatever you happen to be wearing. Somewhere between 2 and 5 million small glands are spread through your skin. They are called eccrine glands. No other primate carries anything close to that many. A chimpanzee has them, and so does a macaque. But in those bodies they cluster in a few regions and thin out to almost nothing across the rest. In a human they cover the entire surface without a gap, forehead and scalp, back and chest. The soft inside of the forearm, the backs of the hands, the shins, the tops of the feet. There is no part of you that was left unfitted. The density is not even, and the pattern of it is worth knowing. The forehead and the upper back carry more per square inch than the thighs do. The palms carry the most of all, several hundred of them in a patch the size of a fingernail. But even the sparse regions are stocked at a level that would be remarkable on any other animal of the same size. A single gland is a very simple machine. Deep in the skin it begins as a coil of tube, narrower than a hair, wound into a small tight knot. From that knot a duct rises straight up through the layers above it and opens at the surface as a pore. Water is drawn out of the fluid around the blood vessels, pushed along the coil, carried up the duct and released onto the outside of you. That is the whole of it. A tap and a pipe, built several million times over and wired. Wired matters. Each of these has a nerve running to it, and the instruction arrives from deep inside the head, from a small region that does nothing all day but read the temperature of the blood moving past it. That region is not asking anyone. It reads a number, compares it against the number it wants, and sends out the correction before the owner of the body has any thought about it at all. When the reading drifts upward, the order goes to the whole surface at once, not to a patch, to all of you. And none of it waits for effort. Your skin is releasing water at this moment, not enough to see. Not enough to feel as wet. A slow, invisible loss that continues through the day and through the night, through sleep, through complete stillness. Lay a palm flat against the inside of your other forearm, hold it there, and give it a few seconds. That soft warmth gathering between them is partly heat, and partly the water the skin had been handing quietly to the air until it was covered over. I would like you to notice where you are right now. Wherever that is, a room at the end of a long evening, a bed with the lamp already low, a chair by a window in the middle of somebody's afternoon. The air touching your skin sits at some temperature, and it is almost certainly not the temperature of the body inside it. A living human is held a little under 37 degrees Celsius. It has been held there all day, without a single decision from the person carrying it. Something has been correcting minute by minute against every current of cool air and every warm patch of sun, and nearly all of that correcting happens in the millimetre or two of skin at the outermost edge. The reason any of it works is a piece of physics you can test with your own breath. Wet the back of a hand and blow gently across it. It goes cold immediately, colder than the room. Nothing was taken away from it but water. Turning liquid water into vapour takes energy, and that energy has to come from somewhere close by. It comes out of the surface the water was resting on. So every trace that lifts off your skin as vapour carries a small parcel of heat away with it, and what remains behind is cooler than it was a second earlier. Now multiply that by a whole body's worth of surface, and then multiply it again by hours. There are roughly 2 square meters of that surface on an adult. Think of it as a radiator you are wearing, on the outside, at full extent, with nothing in the way of it. The capacity is genuinely large. Working hard in heat, a fit adult can put out something like a litre of water in an hour, and hold near that rate for a good while afterward. Across a long hot day, the total climbs to several litres. That is a great deal of heat moved off a living body with no equipment and no pores in it. There is a price, and the price is plain. The system runs on water, so water becomes the thing a body cannot be far from for long. You have to drink. It is also careful with what it spends. The fluid leaves the coil salty, and on the way up the duct a good part of that salt is drawn back through the wall and kept. What reaches the air is mostly water. The body gives away the cheap thing, holds on to the expensive one, and never mentions to you that any of it happened. And now the part that explains the bare skin. Evaporation is not something sweat manages by itself. It needs open air above it. The water has to sit on an exposed surface with room over it, so the vapour can lift away and drier air can move in behind it. Remove that, and the whole arrangement quietly stalls. Fur removes it. A coat holds a layer of still air against the skin, and that is precisely what a coat is for. Warm still air caught in hair is superb insulation, among the finest materials anywhere in the living world. But still air fills with moisture very fast. Once the air down inside the coat has taken up all the water it can hold, nothing more can leave the skin as vapour. The sweat has nowhere to go. It soaks the base of the hair, spreads sideways, runs, and eventually falls from the animal having done almost nothing. You would lose the water and keep the heat. That is the worst of both. This is also why a damp day and a dry day of the same temperature feel like different countries. The ceiling on the whole system is set by how much water the surrounding air is still willing to accept. In dry-moving air, the surface clears almost as fast as it wets, and the cooling is enormous. In heavy, motionless, humid air, the vapour has nowhere to go, and your skin stays wet without much reward. Nothing has changed in the body. What changed is the air, and the air is half of the machine. So the two things are not separate discoveries. They are one design. A bare surface and a whole body water system only make sense together, and either one without the other is close to useless. A few coated animals do manage a version of it anyway. A horse sweats heavily, and its sweat carries a protein that lowers the surface tension of the water, so the fluid can travel out along each hair to the tip of the coat, where the air is actually moving. You can see the result as a wet sheen along the neck of a horse after work. It is an elegant fix, and it tells you exactly what the difficulty is. The water must reach the outside. A horse has to engineer a way of getting it there. You do not. Your outside is already the outside. Most mammals never attempt any of this. They pant. Panting is a real solution and a good one, and there is nothing crude about it. Air is drawn quickly over the wet lining of the mouth, the tongue, the nose and the throat, and the water evaporates from those surfaces instead of from the coat. A dog asleep in a warm room near you is doing exactly that. And it works. But it works across a small wet area rather than a very large one. And it spends the breath in order to do it. The throat and the lungs are being asked to cool the body and to supply the body in the same moment, and there is a limit to how long both of those requests can be met. Past that limit, an animal has one option left, and every one of them knows it perfectly. Find shade, lie down, wait for the sun to move. What that difference was worth, and what it allowed your ancestors to do out in open country, is where all of this is heading. Not quite yet. There is one more detail underneath, and it is an easy one to walk past. Skin glands come in two broad kinds. One opens into a hair follicle and empties along the shaft of a hair. The other opens straight onto the surface on its own, with no hair involved in it at all. In most primates, the first kind dominates the body, which is sensible enough in an animal whose body is hair. In you, the second kind took the whole territory. So it is not only that your hair went fine and short. The plumbing beneath it was rebuilt around the assumption of an open surface, millions of pores delivering water directly to bare air. That is a design, not the residue of something being lost. Whatever happened to your ancestors did not merely strip them, it refitted them. A small population of these glands answers to something other than heat. The ones in your palms and along the soles of your feet respond to a tension, to a sudden noise, a sudden effort, a sudden feeling. It appears to be about grip. A trace of moisture makes a hand hold better rather than worse, which is why fingertips get rubbed together before lifting something awkward. Your hands run their own private weather. The rest of the body runs the thermostat. Rest a hand somewhere it can feel the air and keep it there a while as I carry on. Nothing dramatic is going to happen. The system was built to go unnoticed, which is exactly why it took so long for anyone to look at it and see something extraordinary rather than something ordinary. Because it is extraordinary. Across all the mammals of this planet, whole body evaporative cooling from bare skin is close to unique, and you are wearing it. 2 to 5 million glands. On you. Working now, in the quiet. And that sets our puzzle back on the table. An insect waiting in the seam of a garment, holding a date. A coat that vanished long before any garment existed. And between the two of them, this, a cooling system so effective that the body carrying it can stay out in conditions that send other large animals into the shade. The question is what was asking for it, not comfort. Nothing this costly is ever built for comfort. Something was requiring your ancestors to stay out in the open at the hour when every other animal lies down, and the beginning of that answer is standing directly over their heads. So keep all of that in mind, and come outside with me. Not into a cool morning, into the middle of the day. The country in front of you is open. Dry grass, pale gold, standing perfectly still. Trees scattered far apart, each one holding a small round pool of shade. Low hills a long way off, and a horizon that is shimmering. That shimmer is heat. It lifts off the ground in slow ripples and bends the light above it, so the far trees seem to float a little way off the earth. The air is bright and thick, and the sun sits almost straight overhead. The glare arrives from everywhere at once, off the grass, off the pale ground, off the sky itself. It has no single direction. Nothing here is casting a long shadow. Your own is a small puddle around your feet. Now look at what everything else is doing. Under the nearest tree, animals are lying down in the shade, flanks moving quickly, waiting the hours out. Farther off, a herd stands packed close together, each one shading the next. The birds have gone quiet in the branches, and even the insects have thinned. Shade is the only currency out here at this hour, and there is not a great deal of it. This is the part of the day when open country empties out, not because it is dangerous, because it is expensive. Moving in heat like this costs more than most bodies can afford to spend. So they spend nothing. They wait for the light to go long and gold again, and then the whole plain fills back up. And out in the middle of all that stillness, something is walking. Steady, upright, unhurried. A person crossing open ground in the hour when everything else has stopped, at a pace they could hold for most of the afternoon. That figure is the whole argument, walking, because two things make it possible. And you are carrying both of them tonight. The first is the shape you stand in. When the sun is directly overhead, a body on four legs meets it with the entire back. A long flat surface turned up to the sky, taking that light across its whole length, all day, with nowhere to put it. An upright body meets the same sun with the top of the head and the tops of the shoulders, which is a very small target. Everything else hangs below in its own shade, vertical, turned edge, onto the beam. The difference is not a detail. Around the middle of the day, standing upright can cut the direct sun falling on you to roughly a third of what a four-legged body of the same size has to take. Same creature. Same sun. Different geometry. And standing up buys a second thing. Quietly, air moves faster a few feet above the ground than it does down at ankle height. Ground level is where the air goes sluggish and hot and sits there. Standing lifts your skin up out of that heavy layer and into the moving air above it, where even a slight breeze can reach it and carry off whatever the skin is giving up. Which brings us to the second thing you are carrying, the skin itself, and you already know what it does. Water, everywhere, continuously, across the entire surface of you, and every drop that leaves takes warmth away with it. What matters out here is that it never has to stop. It works while you walk, and it works while the ground tilts upward underfoot. It asks nothing from anything else you need. Compare that with how almost everything else on that plane is cooling. Most mammals shed heat through the mouth. Panting works, and it works well, and it is a fine system for an animal in shade. But panting uses breath, and breath is also what running uses. In many four-legged runners, the breathing is locked to the stride, one cycle for every bound, so the two cannot easily be pulled apart. They can gallop, or they can cool, and doing both at once is where the trouble sits. That is a large part of why the shade under those trees is so full. And it matters more than it sounds, because movement itself makes heat. Muscle is not an efficient engine. Only about a quarter of what it burns comes out as motion, and the rest comes out as warmth, immediately, inside you. Every mile is a small furnace carrying itself across a landscape. Yours is a furnace with the cooling running the whole time. Put the two together, the upright shape and the open skin, and you get something with almost no competition anywhere in the animal world. Not speed. And it is worth being honest about that part. Nearly everything on that plane can outrun you, easily, over any short distance. Over 100 yards it is not close. What you have instead is the part of the day that nothing else wants, and the hours that nothing else is able to use. Distance in heat without stopping. The ability to follow a line of tracks across open ground all afternoon, reading dust and bent grass, in no hurry at all. To walk to water 8 miles off and be back before the light goes. To cross from one stand of trees to the next at noon and think nothing of it. To arrive somewhere unhurried, while everything else is still lying down waiting for evening. The country gives its distances up slowly, one low ridge at a time, and a walking body collects them anyway. Everything out there is waiting for the cool. You are not. Think about what that does to a life. Not just to a single day, but to what a group of people can reach, and how far apart the good places are allowed to be, and how much country a body gets to know. If the middle of the day is usable, the map gets bigger. The distance between water and shade and open ground stops being a wall. It becomes a walk. That is what the bare skin bought. Not a burst of speed. A working day, and there is a passenger riding on top of all this that makes the whole thing urgent. Your brain is about 2% of your body weight. It takes something like 1/5 of all the energy burned while sitting perfectly still. It is the most expensive organ in the body, and it is also by some distance the fussiest about temperature. The tissue that carries thought is soft and densely packed, and it runs warm even when it is doing nothing much at all. Nerve tissue works inside a narrow band. Push it a couple of degrees above where it likes to sit, and it does not fail dramatically. It just gets worse at everything. Quietly, judgment first. Then attention. Then coordination. You have felt the shallow end of this. A hot room in the late afternoon, a long drive, a stuffy train. Thinking goes thick and gluey, and simple decisions start taking longer than they should. Your body is telling you something entirely true. The organ doing the thinking is the one with the least patience for heat. Now put that organ out in the open at noon, and then make it larger. You can see the problem from here. A big brain in bright, hot, open country is not a luxury item. It is a liability, unless something is carrying warmth away as fast as it arrives, and it is arriving from 2 directions at once. From the sun above, from the working body below. So look at where the hair stayed. It stayed on top of the head. When you stand upright, that is the one patch of you still facing straight up into the light. The one surface of vertical posture cannot tilt out of the way. A layer there is not a coat, it is a parasol, shading the skull while air moves freely underneath it. And the scalp sweats heavily, and so does the face. The head carries an unusually dense supply of those glands, and a good deal of what runs down your temples on a hot day is cooling happening directly above the thing that most needs to stay cool. There is an older idea layered onto this, and it deserves naming honestly. Small channels run through the bone of the skull, linking the warm surface of the scalp with the space inside. Some researchers have argued that these act as a cooling route for the brain, opening up as the head warms. Others are not convinced, and it is still genuinely argued over. The constraint underneath it is not argued over. Brains overheat before bodies do, and ours is large. So try reading nakedness the other way round, just for a moment. It looks like a loss. It sounds like a loss, an ape that mislaid its coat somewhere. But nothing about it behaves like a loss out there at midday, and the coat did not simply go missing. It was traded. Traded for cooling that covers the whole of you and keeps running while you move. Traded for the hottest hours of the day, which nothing else was using anyway. Traded, in the end, for room to carry an expensive, heat-shy brain out into the open and keep it working there. That is the leading explanation, and it holds together unusually well. The posture, the skin, the glands, the hair left on the head, the size of the brain. They are not separate facts sitting in a row. They are one answer, told 5 different ways, and that kind of agreement is rare enough to be worth saying out loud, and you are still built to that specification. Right now, under a blanket, in a cool room, on a night when none of it is being asked of you, you are lying inside the body of an animal, designed to keep moving when the air is too hot for anything else to bother. You cool better than almost anything alive, warm slowly, and keep going. Which brings the question of when back into the room, very gently. If heat is the reason, then the fur went when our ancestors moved out into the open and began using the middle of the day. And that is old. Old in a way that has nothing at all to do with cloth, or stitching, or seams, or anything a small insect could ever live inside. For an enormous stretch of time there was simply nothing there for it to move into. So how could anyone put a number on it? On the fur, on the day the coat became invisible, on a change that leaves no bone behind and no fossil to hold up to the light? Hair does not survive, but something else does keep the record, and it is not in the ground at all. It is written into the skin itself, into the small genetic instructions that set its colour, and it can still be read. There is a cost hidden inside that solution, and it lands on your skin. A coat does 2 jobs at once, and we usually only count the first. It holds warmth in, it also holds light out. Fur is a roof. Every hair is a small piece of shade, and a body under a dense coat is an animal living permanently indoors, carrying its own ceiling wherever it goes. Anyone who has stood in a heavy coat on a bright afternoon knows the other side of that. Take the roof away, and the weather comes down onto the skin itself. That is the position our ancestors walked into. They had traded the coat for the ability to keep moving in the open, in the hours when the sun sits high and most animals are lying down in whatever shade they can find. It was a good trade, but it left the outermost layer of the animal answering for something no ancestor of ours had ever had to answer for. Sunlight is not one thing. Most of it is warmth and brightness, and your skin handles that easily, the way it is handling the light in the room around you right now. A small part of it arrives carrying more energy than living tissue is comfortable with. That part passes into the upper layers and knocks things very slightly out of place. Not dramatically, and not all at once. Just steadily, hour after hour, across a whole life lived outdoors near the equator. Under fur, almost none of that reaches the skin. Under fur, skin can be pale and stay pale for a lifetime, because the skin is not the outside of the animal. The hair is. You can see this in our nearest relatives, and it is quietly startling the first time you meet it. Part the hair on a chimpanzee's shoulder, and the skin underneath is often light. The face and the hands darken over the years, because those are the parts that live out in the open. The coat is what keeps everything else pale. Nobody had to invent a pigmented body under a coat, because nothing in the world was asking for one. So when the coat goes, the work of the roof has to be taken over by the material underneath. And the material underneath is you. The skin's answer to that problem is a pigment. Low down in the outer layer of your skin sit cells whose entire occupation is to manufacture it, and to hand it upward in small parcels to the ordinary cells around them. Each parcel settles over the cell's nucleus like a little cap positioned on the side the light comes from. That is not decoration. That is a shield laid deliberately over a set of instructions. The pigment absorbs the energetic part of the light and converts it into a trace of harmless heat. The more of it a skin carries, the more of that light is caught in the top fraction of a millimeter and never reaches anything that matters underneath. Darkly pigmented skin is not a shadow lying on a surface. It is a working filter, built and maintained by living cells, running all day and costing nothing to switch on. Very little else in the living world works that hard without ever being noticed. There is a second, quieter reason the shield matters. Your blood runs closer to the surface than you probably picture, and it carries small, delicate compounds the body needs in order to build a new body. Strong light reaching into the skin breaks some of them down. A pigmented layer keeps those supplies whole. It is looking after your children before they exist, as much as it looks after the body carrying it. Your own skin still does a small version of all this. Stand out in strong light across a week, and it answers. It makes more pigment. It deepens. It is trying to build the roof back over you. That response is old machinery, still installed in you. Still switched on, which brings us to the strange part, and to the reason any of this is worth an hour of your night. That pigment is made to a recipe, and the recipe is written in genes. And a gene, read carefully enough, can tell us roughly how long it has been in the family. I want to slow down there, because that sounds like magic, and it is not. Think of everything written inside you as one very long text. It gets copied. Every generation copies it out again, and the copying is astonishingly careful, and it is never perfect. In each copy a few letters land slightly wrong. Most of those slips do nothing whatsoever. An enormous number of them fall in positions where the change makes no difference at all to the finished product, the same word, spelled a second way. Nothing notices. Nothing corrects it. So the slip stays and gets copied onward, and the copy after that adds a few more of its own. That is the clock. Not the useful changes. The pointless ones. A change that matters gets judged, and the judging is harsh and quick. A change that matters to nobody is simply kept and passed down and joined over time by others exactly like it. Those meaningless slips accumulate at a pace that is roughly steady across long stretches of time. Not exact, roughly, and a rough pace, running for 1,000,000 years, is still a pace you can work with. So you count what is gathered and divide. That is the whole trick. It is closer to dust than to a stopwatch. Paint a wall and dust begins to settle on it. No bell rings, but if you know roughly how fast dust falls in that room and you can run a finger through the layer, you can say roughly how long ago somebody painted. You would not claim the day. You would claim the decade, and be right about it. There is a second thing you can read in that text, and where pigment is concerned it is the more telling one. When a particular version of a gene becomes suddenly, seriously valuable, it spreads, not gently. It spreads the way anything spreads once it starts deciding who lives long enough to have grandchildren. And it does not travel alone. It drags the stretch of text on either side of it along for the ride, because that whole neighbourhood gets copied as a single piece. So the neighbourhood goes quiet. Almost everyone ends up carrying the same version of it, and the ordinary variety that ought to be sitting there collapses into sameness. Then Slowly, the dust begins to fall again. New meaningless slips arrive one at a time and speckle the quiet stretch back up. Measure how speckled it has become, and you are measuring elapsed time. A neighbourhood that is still very quiet means recent. A thoroughly speckled one means old. That is the instrument, and it is the finest one anybody has for reaching back beyond where bones and stone tools can carry you. Now turn it on the gene that governs how much dark pigment a human skin makes. It is a receptor, sitting on the surface of those pigment-making cells, a switch that decides which pigment they build and how hard they work. Across African populations, the working part of that switch is remarkably uniform. Almost no variation at all in the section that does the job, which is exactly what you find when a version is being held firmly in place, because the alternatives cost too much under that sun. But the harmless positions around it are speckled, not lightly. Heavily apply the paste to the speckling, and the number that comes back is roughly 1.2 million years. Let that settle for a moment, because it is the first hard figure in a story that has so far been mostly argument. Roughly 1.2 million years ago, the lineage you belong to already had darkly pigmented skin. Then think about what that number quietly requires. Pigment of that kind is expensive to build and expensive to maintain, and it is only worth the expense if the skin is genuinely standing in the light. Under a coat it pays for nothing. There is no pressure at all to shield a surface that already has a ceiling over it. Pigment follows exposure, it never leads it. So that is not the date the fur went. It is the date by which the fur was already gone, and gone long enough for an entire protective system to be favoured, spread, and settled across a whole population. That takes time of its own, generations of it, more than you can hold in your head at once, which makes 1.2 million years a latest possible date rather than the moment itself. The moment sits somewhere behind it, further back in the dark, and nobody alive can point at the exact spot where it happened. It is worth saying plainly that dates read out of genes come with weather around them. Different methods, different assumptions about the pace, different populations sampled, they return different answers, sometimes by hundreds of thousands of years. Other work on the same question has landed older, and some of it has landed younger. What none of it does is land small. The scale of the thing is not in dispute, even where the decimal point is. One more thing before we move on, because it matters rather more than the clock does. Everything that happened to human colour afterwards, the whole long account of how the range of human shades came to be as wide across this world as it is a different night's telling, and it is not this one. Here colour is being used only as a clock, and for nothing else at all. Every shade of skin now living is skin doing its work in the light it grew up under, on peoples who built languages and boats and law and music with those hands. There is no ladder anywhere in this. There never was one, and the biology has never once offered a reason to imagine otherwise. What you are left holding is a body that has been bare for an extraordinarily long time. Not thousands of years, and not tens of thousands. Something past 1 million, which means your skin has been the outside of you for something like 50,000 generations in an unbroken line, each one handing it forward to the next, and the small insect living in the seam of the cloth against you is holding a number of its own, a far smaller one. That gap between an animal that lost its cover more than 1 million years ago and an animal that covered itself back up almost yesterday is the whole shape of what you and I are working out here. But before any of that, There is honest business to settle. Heat is the leading explanation for why the coat went, and it is a strong one. It has never been the only one that serious people have put forward. So we have a flaw to stand on, and a reason that fits it. Heat, open ground, a sun almost directly overhead, and a body that could keep working when other bodies had to stop. That is the leading answer. It carries the most evidence behind it, and it has earned the place it holds. But I want to be careful with you here, because this is where a great many retellings go wrong. They pick a winner and hold it up, and everything else gets swept off the table. The listener goes away with one tidy cause and a closed door. Real science almost never looks like that. When a change is expensive, and this one was very expensive, it usually gets paid for by more than one buyer, and the buyers do not always arrive together. So do not hear what follows as rivals to the heat argument. Hear them as the other hands on the same door. Start with the pressures that are too small to see across a room. Ticks, fleas, lice. I want to keep this clinical, because there is no shame anywhere in it, and because shame would only get in the way of the point. None of it is a comment on you, or on anyone. This is ecology, and it says nothing at all about any body being unclean. A coat is not only insulation, though insulation is the first thing anyone thinks of. A coat is habitat. Think for a moment about what thick fur offers something very small, and you will start to see a coat as a place, rather than a covering. Warmth that holds steady all night, long after the air outside it has cooled. Darkness. A humidity that never quite drops away. Shelter from wind and rain and sun, and from the animal's own fingers. It is an address with the rent already paid, and it travels, and it never quite goes cold. A furred mammal walks around carrying a whole landscape on its back, and every deer, every wolf, every monkey in the canopy is a small country with residents in it. Now take the coat away. The landscape closes. No dark, no damp, and no forest of shafts to grip. What is left is a flat, open, well-lit surface with nowhere at all on it to hide. Anything that lands on bare skin has to cross ground it cannot disappear into. Your eye can find it. Your hand can reach it. That sounds like a small thing, and on any single afternoon it is. Spread it across a whole life and across a whole population, and it stops being small. It is also the kind of advantage you can put a number on, which is rarer in this subject than you might expect. You can see the cost in time alone. If you spend an afternoon watching a troop of monkeys or a group of chimpanzees, you will notice how much of the day goes into working through one another's hair. Hours of it. Some of that is affection and politics. A great deal of it is plain maintenance. Those are hours that cannot go into finding food, or resting, or watching the far edge of the grass. A body with fewer passengers owes fewer hours, and you have inherited that balance. And the passengers cost more than time. They take blood, in small amounts steadily. They take attention that could be pointed at something else. Small costs, repeated every day across a whole lifetime, add up into something an animal can genuinely feel. They carry more than themselves from one body to the next. A body carrying fewer of them has more left over for everything else. More to grow with, more to move with, more to spend on an organ that never stops asking to be fed. So that advantage is real, it is measurable, and it is not a footnote. But be honest about its limits too. Plenty of mammals live with a heavy load and keep their coats regardless. because fur pays for itself in a dozen other ways. Parasite pressure on its own would have to be extraordinary to strip a mammal bare, and there is no sign that it ever was. What it does well is sharpen a change that is already moving. Once a lineage begins thinning its coat for some other reason, this becomes an excellent reason never to grow it back. That is the shape I want you to hold. Not a winner and a loser, a first cause and a second one leaning the same way. Now the third pressure. It could only appear after the others had begun their work. Once skin is visible, skin can be read. Think about what a coat conceals. Because under thick hair an animal's condition is mostly hidden from view. You cannot see the colour of the skin beneath it, or its evenness, or its shine. Thin that hair down to something fine and short, and all of it comes out into the open air. The surface now reports on the body underneath it. Health becomes visible. Age becomes visible too. And so does the load of small passengers we were just discussing. And you already do this. You do it in the first second of meeting a stranger, long before any thought about it has time to form. Something in you reads a face and a pair of hands and returns a verdict you never asked for. That reflex is old. It is much older than any idea you hold about beauty. Once a trait can be read, it can be preferred. And preference is a quiet force, but it does not stay quiet forever. A small, steady leaning, repeated across many thousands of generations, turns into anatomy. That is how a peacock ends up carrying that tail, and nobody chose it in one go. It accumulated. The man who first set out natural selection did not believe heat explained our bare skin at all. Darwin leaned on choice. He thought our ancestors had simply preferred less hair over and over, until very little of it was left. Most researchers now think he put too much weight on that. The instinct was not wrong though, and there is a fingerprint that supports it. Men and women do not carry fine body hair in the same amounts, or in quite the same places. A difference between the sexes, in a trait like this one, is a classic signature of choice at work. Heat would have pressed on everybody equally. It does not explain the split. Still, choice cannot have started any of this. Choice needs something to choose. A preference for less hair has nothing to act on until less hair exists, and until it is already doing some good. It makes a superb amplifier and a poor beginner. So here is the layered answer, and I would like you to carry it with you. Heat opened the door. A bare body could shed warmth in the open, and that mattered most where it mattered most. Around an organ that cannot afford to run hot. Then the smaller pressures arrived and held the door where it stood, because there were fewer passengers on skin you can see and reach. And then, with the skin on show, choice leaned against that same door and pushed it further than either pressure would have taken it alone. It is like a path worn across grass. Someone cuts the corner because it saves a minute. That is why it starts. Then the ground is easier there, so more feet follow, and then it looks like a path, so people walk it because it is a path. 3 different reasons. One line across the field. Ask which of them made it, and you have asked a question with no single answer. That is the honest state of this. Heat first, most probably. Everything else layered over the top of it. A researcher who tells you it was likely several things at once is not dodging you, and is not hedging for the sake of it. That is simply what the evidence looks like from the inside. There is one more explanation you have very likely heard, and it deserves a straight answer rather than a joke. It is usually called the aquatic ape idea. The proposal is that our ancestors passed through a long watery phase, wading in shallows, swimming, gathering along a shoreline, and lost their hair the way other water mammals lost theirs. It is a tidy story, and it reaches for several human oddities at once and ties them into a single knot, which is exactly what a good hypothesis is meant to do. That is a large part of why it has lasted so well and why you have probably met it more than once. It is not supported by the evidence. Let me tell you why, briefly, and then set it down. The fossil record does not show it. Our ancestors turn up again and again in woodland and open country, across enormous spans of time, with no watery stretch to speak of. The anatomy does not show it either. Mammals that gave up fur for a life in water have something in its place, and that something is a thick layer of fat beneath the skin, built to hold warmth in. You do not have that layer. Put a person into cool water, and the warmth leaves quickly, far more quickly than it leaves in air of the very same temperature. You have felt that in a pool that seemed perfectly comfortable for the first few minutes. And there is a deeper objection than either of those. Our most distinctive cooling system cannot work in water at all. Nothing evaporates under the surface. The one adaptation that makes your bare skin so remarkable would be useless in the setting the idea depends upon, and that is not a small mismatch. It points the other way entirely. So, a good question, an elegant answer, and the wrong one. Serious people proposed it, and serious people defended it for a long time, and it did the field a real service while it lasted. It forced the alternative to be stated out loud, in detail, and defended properly. An idea that turns out to be wrong will often do that job better than an idea that is merely safe. We set it down with respect, and then we go on. Which leaves you standing in front of a body that was finished, genuinely finished, long before there was a single thread anywhere in the world. Bare skin, a cooling system running across all of it. No coat, and nothing brought in to replace the coat. Nothing living in the seams, because there were no seams yet for anything to live in. The small witness we began with had not arrived, and it had nowhere to arrive into. And people lived like that, not for a season, not for a span you could tidy away in a sentence, for a stretch so long that everything you would ever call history sits inside it like a coin dropped in a field. To feel the size of that, you have to stop counting years altogether, and start imagining one ordinary morning, and the day that follows it, and the night after that hold all of that together for a moment, and then set a calendar down beside it. The strangest part of this story is not why the coat went, and it is not really how. It is when. And it is the long, quiet emptiness that opens up on the far side of that date. The fur went early. The clock we followed a little while ago puts one edge of it beyond 1,000,000 years back, and every other line of argument pushes earlier rather than later. So call it 1,000,000 years, and then quietly assume that the true figure is older than that. Clothing sits at the opposite end of the same line, and clothing is late. It is so late that the number when we finally reach it is going to sound like a slip of the pen against everything that came before. That number is not a hunch, it is a measurement. The small insect in the seam is still holding it for us, and we are not there yet. What matters tonight is the space between those two dates. Something like 800,000 years, quite possibly a great deal more than that. An unbroken stretch of people alive on this earth with no coat and no cloth, and needing neither of them. It is difficult to hold a number that size in the mind. so let us not hold it as a number at all. Take everything you would ordinarily call history. The writing, the cities, the roads, the crops standing in rows, the whole lit shelf of it. All of that is only a few thousand years deep. Lay that entire span down end to end, then lay it down again, and again, 80 times over. Only at the far end of the 80th do you arrive at the beginning of the gap. 80 times all of history. Bare skin, every single day of it. And nobody inside that enormous stretch was waiting to be finished. That is the thing I would like to hand over now, and I would like to do it slowly, so come into one of those days with me. Not a remarkable one. An ordinary one, beside a river in eastern Africa, under a sky that has been doing this for a very long time already. You wake before the light. The air is cool, cooler than it ought to feel, because a bare body is entirely honest about air. Nothing sits between the skin and the temperature, so the temperature simply arrives, and it arrives everywhere at once. Along the shins, across the back, in the thin skin over the ribs. Your whole surface is reading the world, and it has been reading it quietly all night long. You are lying against other people, because that is how the cold hours are done here. A shoulder rests against your shoulder. A child is folded in somewhere warm between two adults, breathing slowly, entirely at ease with the arrangement. The sky goes grey. Then it turns the shade of the inside of a shell. A bird starts up somewhere behind the sleeping bodies, and another one answers from much further off, and the answer takes its time coming. Sitting up lets the cool find the chest, and there is nothing alarming in that, because the morning is about to do what mornings do. You stand. You move. Within a few minutes of walking, the cold has gone out of the arms entirely, burned off from the inside by the body itself. That is the first lesson a bare body teaches, and it is worth keeping. Nobody here is waiting for the sun. You are your own small fire, and moving is how the fire gets fed. The grass stands wet to the thigh. Seed heads drag across your legs and leave their water behind, cold and clean and pleasant, and by the time the low ground arrives it has all dried away. Then the heat begins to come up. It comes slowly at first, and then it stops being slow. By the middle of the day the light stands straight overhead, and the ground has begun handing its heat back up into the shins. The air sits still like a held breath. The cicadas go on in the flat trees, and here is the thing the body does without ever once being asked. A shine comes up on the shoulders and along the forearms. A film, no more than that. Then the smallest movement of air crosses it, and something inside you cools. It is not the air doing the cooling, it is the water leaving, and taking the heat away with it as it goes. We have already been through why that works and how uncommon it is, so tonight take the feel of it instead. Dry heat pressing down on the tops of the shoulders. A shine that fades and comes back. The steady, unhurried business of a body that is simply handling all of this. It is happening on your skin as you lie there, in a room those walkers could never have pictured. By the deep part of the afternoon the track bends down toward the water. The sand at the top of the bank is hot underfoot. 2 steps lower it turns cool, then wet, and then it gives way altogether. The river takes your ankles, and the shock of it goes straight up your spine. You wade in to the waist and drink from cupped hands, and the water tastes faintly of stone. A heron lifts off the shallows on the far side, unhurried, folding its legs up behind it as it goes. Dragonflies stitch back and forth above the surface. A small herd of antelope stands drinking downstream with their ears turning, watching all of this with mild interest and no alarm at all. A fish rolls once, close in, and slides back under. Coming out, there is no drying. There is nothing to dry with, and nothing about you that needs it. The water goes on working for another 10 minutes, cooling you the whole climb back up the bank. And every minute of that is free. Call it the quiet reward for having no coat. Then the ground rises to a fig tree, and stepping into that shade is like stepping through a door. The temperature drops the instant you cross the line, and your skin reports it before the next stride lands. Backs go against the bark. Out beyond the canopy the flat land shimmers and refuses to hold still, while in here it is dim and green and about 10 degrees kinder. Somebody is cracking nuts open on a flat stone with a smaller one. Somebody else is rolling bark fibre against her thigh, twisting it into cord, never once looking down at her hands, because her hands do not need watching. The talk is low. It stops for long stretches, and nobody minds the stopping. These are not people making do. Every one of them can read this country. They know which tree fruits in which month, and where the water stays when the river drops away, and how to work a stone into an edge that holds. They know the animals by their tracks and by their moods. All of that is carried in heads and in hands, and none of it is carried in cloth. The light lengthens. Late sun on the back is a different creature from noon sun, softer and lower and more golden, and your own forearm knows that difference perfectly well. Then the sun goes, and the cool comes in behind it much faster than seems fair. This is the hour when having no coat costs something. It does cost something, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. It is also, on every one of those 800,000 evenings, solved. The fire has been going since dusk. You sit close in, and the heat lands on your face and your chest and your shins while the back stays cool, so after a while you turn around. Everyone turns. That slow rotation around a fire is one of the oldest habits your family has. Sparks go up and lose themselves in an enormous sky. Somewhere out in the dark a nightjar calls, over and over, perfectly content with the night. Then the group lies down and sleeps the way it has always slept. Shoulder against shoulder, children in the middle where it stays warmest, bodies giving heat to bodies right through until morning, because a body is a very good heater, and there are plenty of them lying here. You wake once in the coldest hour before dawn. The stars have swung right over. The fire is a low red seam of embers, and someone already awake lays a branch across it without saying anything, and the flame takes hold again. Your arm moves, finds warmth, and sleep comes back. Now ask what was missing from that day. The honest answer is nothing. Nobody there was cold in a way they could not solve. Nobody was exposed in a way that frightened them. Nobody sat in that shade wishing for cloth, because no part of the day had asked for any. The word for how those people lived is not without. The word is at home, and they were people. Across that immense stretch the bodies changed, and the heads changed, and the hands grew better at everything they touched, but at no point along the whole length of it was anyone a rough draft. They were expert. They knew their country the way you know the layout of your own house in the dark. And they did every bit of it with nothing on at all. So the thing we quietly assume, that clothing is one of the marks of being human, turns out to be almost exactly backwards. Clothing did not make us. We were already fully ourselves, for longer than everything we normally mean by the word history, without a stitch anywhere. Clothing is not what made us human. Clothing is what let us leave. That is the hinge of the entire story. Bare skin owned the hot open day, and it owned it for a length of time the mind cannot really hold. And then, somewhere near the far edge of that gap, people began walking into country the skin had never once been asked to handle. Cold nights first, then cold days, then winters and wind and ground that stayed hard until spring. And on the evening when someone first pulled a covering over their shoulders and kept it there, something very small changed address. It came off the scalp and moved into the folds. It began to live in the cloth instead of on the body, and it has been sitting in there keeping the date ever since. Which leaves the one question still standing. How on earth do you read a date off an insect? So come back now to the seam. It has been waiting there since the first minutes of this, and I have not forgotten it, and I do not think you have either. A small insect folded down into the fabric of something worn, not on skin, in cloth. I called it a receipt. And now I want to show you exactly how a receipt like that gets read. Nothing about this is unpleasant, and I do not want you to hear it that way. It is simply an animal with an address, and the address it keeps is the whole of the point. There are two forms of this insect that concern us, and the difference between them carries the entire story. One of them lives on the head. The other lives in whatever you happen to be wearing. They look very nearly alike, and under a lens you would struggle to tell them apart at all. But they keep different homes, and a home, in biology, is very nearly everything. Take the first. Head lice spend their whole lives on the scalp. They feed there, they move there, and they lay their eggs there, fixing each one to the base of a hair where it stays warm and steady. Their feet give the game away entirely. Each claw closes to a width that fits a human head hair almost exactly, the way your hand closes around a rail. That is not an accident. It is a body shaped by one single surface across an enormous stretch of time. Reach up and touch your own head for a second. That fine, dense growth, the one place on you where the coat stayed thick, is a habitat. An old one. A head louse living there has everything it needs within a few centimetres of where your fingers are resting. Warmth, moisture, food, and hair to hold on to. Our closest relatives in the animal world carry their own versions of this insect in their own coats, and have done for as long as there have been coats. This is ancient company, older than we are. Now the second form. It is called the body louse, and the name misleads a little, because it does not live on the body at all. It lives in clothing. It spends the great part of its life down in the seams and folds of whatever is being worn, resting there, moving there, laying its eggs onto the fibres themselves. It comes out to the skin to feed, and then it goes straight back. The cloth is the house. The skin is only the kitchen. Run a finger along the inside of your collar, or the seam at your cuff, that narrow warm channel, held against a body all day and folded away all night, is the address written on the envelope. And here is the small detail that does all of the work. Take one of these insects and set it down on bare skin, with nothing to go back to, and it has no home at all. There is nowhere to rest between meals, and nowhere at all to lay. Its eggs need fibre, and the fine short hair across most of you will not hold them. It is not that your skin drives the animal away. It is that your skin is not a house. This one is built for the inside of a garment, the way the other is built for the shaft of a hair. So sit with what that implies, because it is worth your slow attention. The body louse did not arrive from somewhere else. The genetics place it firmly inside the head louse family, a branch, not a stranger. It came from the form that lives on the scalp, which makes it the younger of the two, and puts a hard limit on how old it can possibly be. A creature that lives in clothing cannot exist before clothing. There is no earlier version of it waiting around somewhere for garments to be invented, and there is nothing else for it to have been. The habitat has to come first. Only then can something move into it. And something did. Somewhere on somebody not so different from you, a line of scalp-dwelling insects found a second surface sitting above the skin, a covering that stayed warm, stayed close, and stayed put night after night. Some of them moved down into it. Across many generations they changed, a different grip, a different rhythm, a different way of laying, tuned to fibre instead of hair. They became a separate thing, and not because anything intended it. They became separate because a new room had opened in the house, and new rooms do not stay empty for long. Which brings you to the clock itself, and I want to explain it in the plainest words I have, because it is the hinge of everything else. Every lineage of living things copies itself forward. Each copy is very nearly perfect, and very nearly is the phrase that matters. A few small changes slip in each time, scattered through the long text of the genome, and most of them make no difference to anything at all. They simply gather. And they gather at a pace that is rough, but not random, and steady enough across long spans to be treated as a rate. Now picture two populations that stop mixing. Before the split they share their changes, and afterwards they do not. Each one goes on quietly collecting its own small differences, and the two texts drift steadily apart. Measure how far apart they have drifted, divide that by the pace, and you have an estimate of how long they have been separate. Here is the picture I would like you to hold. Two handwritten copies of one enormous book, carried to opposite ends of a country, and recopied by hand for generations in each place. Nobody compares notes. Small slips creep in with every copy, on both sides, and nobody notices them at the time. After long enough, the two versions differ in a certain number of places. If you know roughly how many slips one generation of copying introduces, you can work backwards from those differences to the day the copies parted. That is the method. And when it is turned on head lice and the lice of clothing, it gives a date for the moment the second form broke away from the first, which is, near enough, the date on which clothing became a place for something to live. So here is the number, and here is the honesty that has to travel beside it. Published estimates for that split run from roughly 80,000 years ago at the recent end to about 170,000 years ago at the older end. Different research groups, different stretches of the genome, different assumptions about how fast the changes gather, and about how long a single generation of an insect lasts. Different populations of lice sampled in different parts of the world. You will find individual papers quoting a much tighter figure, with a confident-looking range attached to it. Taken together, though, the field has not settled on 1 year, and it would be a small dishonesty to tell you that it has. What I would rather you carried away is not a precise number at all. It is the shape of the answer. Every one of those estimates lands in the same broad country. And that country is recent. Hold the word recent against everything you already know about the coat. Whatever the exact figure turns out to be, the covering came late, and it came late by an extraordinary margin, so late that it hardly registers against the age of the bare skin underneath it. And now the careful part, because a date like this can be asked to carry more than it can hold. It does not date the first garment. It cannot. What it dates is the point at which something worn became a reliable and continuous habitat. Worn often enough, closely enough, and by enough people in regular contact with one another that a population of insects could settle in and stay. Somebody could have pulled a hide across their shoulders on a cold night, the way you might pull a blanket around your own shoulders now, long before any of this. Worn it for a single season and left it behind in the spring. No tenant, no trace, no receipt. So take the date as a floor and not as a ceiling. Covering was very probably in occasional use before the lice can see it at all. What the lice mark is the moment it became a habit. The moment being covered stopped being an event and turned into a condition. It is also, and I want you to hold this alongside the rest, a soft-edged number. The pace of change is estimated rather than measured directly, and the generation times are approximations. The calculation then carries that uncertainty forward, quietly, into every year of its answer. 90,000 years between the high estimate and the low one is not a rounding error. That is the honest size of the doubt, and you should keep it beside the number. But stay a moment with what we actually have, because I think it is the strangest gift in the whole story. We never found the first garment. We were never going to. Hide returns to the ground, and so does plant fibre. Sinew, bark, cord and wool all go back within a few years in most conditions, and there is no chance at all that a scrap of the earliest covering survived 100,000 of them. There is no case for you to stand in front of. No needle, no thread, no fragment of cloth under glass. The one object you would most like to see is gone, completely and permanently, and it was gone long before anyone thought to go looking for it. So we did not find the garment. We found the tenant. Something moved into the seam of the first regular clothing, and it never moved out. It has been carried along in the folds of everything people have worn since, every climate, every continent, every century that followed. And the whole time, meaning nothing by it, it has been keeping the elapsed time in its own body. It simply changed at the pace that living things change, and it never once stopped. So you are holding two dates now, and you can feel them pulling away from each other. One is enormous, and it belongs to the skin you are sitting in. The other is small and recent, and it belongs to the cloth lying over that skin. Between them runs a stretch of time so long that it turns the whole question inside out. Because if the covering came only that late, then clothing is not the thing that made us. It cannot be. We were already entirely ourselves without it, for a span you cannot really picture, in a body that needed nothing added to it. Which leaves the last question standing, and it is the one I have been holding for you all this while. Why cover a body that was already finished? And what did that covering open up the moment it went on? The answer turns on where people went next. So let us put the three questions down side by side and answer each of them as plainly as the evidence will allow. The first was when. When did the coat go? Long ago. That is the honest short answer, and it is worth saying before any of the detail arrives. Not thousands of years ago, and not tens of thousands either, but well over 1,000,000 years, and quite possibly a good deal more than that. The clock we can actually read for this runs through the skin itself rather than through any bone. Pigmentation genetics places protective dark skin in our lineage by roughly 1.2 million years ago, and skin that sits beneath a coat has no need of that protection at all. Skin standing in open light does. So the fur was already gone before that date rather than after it, which makes the loss older than the evidence that dates it. Sit with the size of that number for a moment, because it is an easy one to read straight past. Everything you would ordinarily call history fits into a thin sliver at the very end of it. The first planted fields, the first walled cities, the first written words, all of that arrives far, far later than the change we have been circling. The people you descend from lived bare skinned for a stretch of time so long that the mind slides off the edge of it. Not as an accident, not as a loss. It was the ordinary condition of being that animal, held steady across tens of thousands of generations, and nobody living inside it would have found it remarkable. The second question was why? Why would any animal give up a coat? Because of heat. We became creatures that move in the open, in the middle of the day, at the hour when most other animals have stopped and found shade. Bare skin with millions of small glands beneath it can shed heat continuously, turning water into air across the entire surface of a body at once. There is very little else like it anywhere in the animal world, and nothing at all like it among our close relatives. Most mammals dump heat in bursts, and then have to stop and recover before they can carry on. You do it while you keep going. That is what the coat was traded away for. Not warmth surrendered, heat handled. You still run on that trade. And it was not heat working entirely alone, which matters, because the neater story is usually the less true one. A bare body carries fewer passengers, and it offers them far fewer places to settle in out of reach. Bare skin is also readable in a way that a coat is not, since condition shows plainly on an open surface, and what can be seen can be chosen. Those pressures almost certainly did not begin the change by themselves. They sharpened it, the way a current deepens a channel that has already been cut. Layered, not competing. Heat opened the door, and everything else followed through behind it. The third question was when we covered ourselves back up again. Here the answer flips over. Not 1,000,000 years. Not 500,000. The small tenant in the seam, the one that cannot make a living on your skin and needs the cloth you put over it, places the covering somewhere inside the last couple of 100,000 years. That is precisely why it counts as evidence rather than as decoration. It could not have existed at all before there was cloth for it to exist in. So it sets a ceiling on how old our clothing can be, and by the standards of this story that ceiling sits astonishingly low. Hold the two dates in one hand now, and feel the difference in weight between them. Bare for well over 1,000,000 years. Dressed for a small fraction of that, at the very outside, that is the shape of it. And that gap is the thing that turns the whole story over. Clothing feels like the human signature, the one thing that nothing else on the planet does. It is the first thing you reach for in the morning, and the last thing you set down at night. So it is easy to imagine cloth as the moment we became ourselves, the point where the animal ended and the person began. By the clock, it is the other way round entirely. Nakedness is the older invention here, and by a long way the deeper one. Your bare skin is the adaptation. Your clothing is the workaround. Turn that sentence over slowly, because it only gets clearer with the looking. Your skin was never a problem that clothing came along to solve. Your skin was the solution. It answered a hard problem of heat in open country under a high sun, and it answered that problem so completely that it held for more than 1,000,000 years without a single stitch of help. Clothing did not repair a flaw in the design. Clothing extended the reach of something that already worked. Because the moment you can carry shelter on your own back, the map quietly opens into a night that would otherwise have turned the walk around, into a season that would have turned it around, into a latitude that a body shaped by tropical daylight has no business surviving in, north into serious cold, then into ice, then, in time, into more or less everywhere. We did not dress because we were weak. We dressed because we were leaving. That is the sentence worth carrying out of all of this. Every coat since is a small portable piece of the climate your body was built for, wrapped close and carried into a climate it was not. The fur went so that we could own the hot open day, at the hour when nothing else would move through it. The cloth arrived so that we could own the cold night as well, and the cold country, and the cold half of the year. One of those two things is a body. The other is a technology, and calling it a workaround takes nothing away from it. Nothing else our species has ever made changed the shape of the map so completely, and it managed that without changing us at all. There is a quiet asymmetry in the pair of them, and it is worth noticing before we go on. An adaptation takes hundreds of thousands of generations, and it is written permanently into the body that carries it. A workaround can be invented once, taught in an afternoon, and put on or taken off in a second. You are wearing both of them tonight. Only one of them comes off when you are done with it. Now the honest part, because a neat ending here would quietly be a false one. The date of the fur loss is not settled, and the people who work on it will tell you that before they tell you anything else. The pigmentation clock gives us a no later than rather than a no earlier than, and that is a smaller thing than it first appears to be. It tells us the coat had certainly gone by roughly 1.2 million years ago. It cannot tell us how much earlier than that it went. Some readings push the loss back toward 2 million years, alongside the change in body shape and the move out into open country. Others hold it later and tighter, and the honest position sits somewhere across that whole span. The number is a floor to stand on. It is not a pin in a map. The weighting of the causes is argued over just as much. Almost nobody doubts that heat matters here, because the cooling system you carry is far too extraordinary to be explained any other way. But how much of the change heat achieved by itself, and how much came from parasites and how much from preference and choice, is genuinely unresolved. You cannot run the experiment a second time. You cannot rewind 1,000,000 years, remove one pressure, and then watch what the body does without it. So the layered phrasing is not a hedge, it is simply the most accurate sentence available. Heat began it. Other pressures almost certainly shaped it. The exact share belonging to each is beyond our reach for now, and the dates read out of the seam carry the widest uncertainty of all three. A molecular clock depends on an assumed rate of change, on the points chosen to calibrate it, and on which populations happen to be sampled. Published estimates for the split run from about 80,000 years ago out to about 170,000. That is a wide spread, and it deserves to be reported as a spread rather than quietly averaged into one confident number. Every one of those studies says the same qualitative thing. Recent, not one of them can say exactly when. There is a subtler limit as well, and it is worth carrying with you. The receipt records something narrower than you might want it to record. It dates the point at which clothing became habitual, worn often enough and steadily enough that something small could move into the seam and stay there for good. a hide pulled over the shoulders on a cold night and dropped again at first light houses, nobody at all. So the first covering may well be older than its tenant, perhaps by a very long way. What the tenant marks is the moment cloth became a way of living rather than an occasional idea, and beyond that there is more than one lineage of lice, more than one method of reading them, and more than one laboratory arriving at more than one answer. Asking a rough clock for a single year is asking it for a precision it has never had. I would rather leave those edges visible than hand you a bow tied neatly over the top of them. The shape of the answer is solid, and it is held up under a great deal of testing. The decimal places are not, and they may never be. So here is where all of it comes to rest. You are bare because the people you come from became creatures of the hot open day, and bare sweating skin was both the price they paid and the prize they won for it. You are dressed because their descendants eventually walked out of the country that skin was built for, and kept walking. The fur loss is old, older than almost anything you would call human. The clothing is young enough to sit inside the last short stretch of the story, and a small animal in the seam has been quietly holding the receipt for us ever since. There is one thing left to say about what all of that leaves you wearing tonight. So this is where it leaves you. There is a blanket over you, almost certainly. A duvet, a sheet, a quilt gone soft at the corners, a coat pulled off its hook and thrown across the foot of the bed. Whatever form it takes tonight, it is doing one job and only one. It holds a thin pocket of warm air against a body and refuses to give that air back. That is the whole trick. It always was, every covering ever made, in every country and every century, is a machine for slowing the escape of heat, and it has never been anything else besides, and the trick is roughly 100,000 years old. Not the cloth. The cloth is new. The idea is old, the idea that a body might carry its own weather along with it, and that warmth is a thing worth building a small wall around. Underneath that idea, tonight, is your skin, and your skin is older than the idea by a distance that is almost comic. Not by a little, and not by anything a person could reasonably call a modest margin. It has been solving the exact opposite problem for 1,000,000 years and more, and it has not paused for a single hour in all that enormous stretch of time. Hold the shape of that for a moment, because it is the whole of it. Two solutions, stacked, one lying quietly on top of the other. They were built for opposite purposes, and they arrived from opposite directions, separated by more time than any of us can properly picture. The lower one exists to throw heat away, steadily and continuously, as fast as a working body can manage to make it. The upper one was invented to hold heat in and let none of it drift off into the cool air of the room. One of them came out of long afternoons in open country, under a sun that never let up. The other came out of a winter that our particular kind of animal had no business standing in at all. Both of them belong to you, without any effort or decision on your part. Both of them are at work tonight, in the same warm handspan of the world. On you. It is a strange arrangement when you say it plainly. The oldest thing you own is a cooling system, and it is remarkably good. The newest thing lying on top of it is a heater, and it is remarkably simple. Neither one was designed by the person now using them. Both were simply arrived at, the first by a body reshaping itself across an unimaginable stretch of time, the second by a few careful hands in a cold place, working fast because the weather gave them no other option. Nothing about the room in which this is happening was ever part of the plan. The plan, if the word can be stretched that far, was open country and a high sun and a very long walk across dry ground, bright light, dry air, a body that could keep going while the whole day burned around it and everything else lay down in whatever shade it could find. Ceilings were not in that plan, and neither were walls or wool or the soft weight lying across your legs at this moment. And yet here is the outcome, warm and unbothered and entirely at ease, in a climate that ought to be impossible. That ease is not an accident of luck. It is a piece of engineering, and it is resting on top of you. Because what a blanket really does is not fight the cold at all. It is closer to a small piece of an older climate, kept alive by hand and carried a very long way from home. Folded up. Moved north. Laid down again at the end of every day since. Your body has never once revised the inner temperature it settled on out there in the heat, and it has no intention of revising it now, tonight, for anybody. It still runs at the setting the old country gave it, and it always will. So the covering rebuilds a little of that country around you, one thin layer thick, and holds it steady until morning without asking for anything in return. Once that is clear, the same idea starts turning up everywhere in the room. The window is holding the same pocket, and so is the wall, and so is the door you shut behind you an hour ago. A coat on a hook is the identical idea with sleeves sewn into it. The heating in a house is that same idea made loud and expensive and permanent. All of it comes down from one thin covering pulled across one set of shoulders, somewhere far colder than the country where any of this began. Your house is a blanket with rooms inside it. And here is the part that seems to matter most, now that all the rest has been said. The human body did not change to meet the cold. Human hands did. The cold never got its chance to reach in and rebuild the animal, because something considerably quicker arrived first and settled the matter. Knowledge arrived first. Somebody worked out a covering, and showed somebody else how it was done, and from that evening onward the answer travailed in habits rather than in blood. That is a genuine turning point in the story, and it is very easy to walk straight past it. From then on, adaptation could happen between one nightfall and the next. It could be taught and improved and mended and handed whole to a person who had never needed it before and would not have lasted a season without it. The two gifts are not the same kind of thing, and the difference is worth holding. The skin was given to you by people nobody will ever know anything about, and it cannot be taken off, lost, borrowed, or left behind on a train. The blanket came down from people who taught each other, and it has to be remade in every generation or it simply disappears. One inheritance lives inside the body and needs nobody. The other lives outside it and needs everybody. Let one word be turned over before sleep, because it has been sitting underneath all of this from the beginning. Naked, it sounds like something missing. It sounds like a lack, like a coat that was taken away and never handed back afterwards. But nothing was taken from your body, and nothing was withheld from it either. The count was done, and it came out even, follicle for follicle, with animals that are still fully covered. What you have is not an absence of anything, it is a refinement, and by any fair reckoning, it is a magnificent one. There is no loss anywhere in this story, and there is nobody at all to blame for it. There is only a body rearranged, very slowly and very patiently, toward the one thing it most needed to do, which was to stay cool and keep moving under an open sky while other animals waited for evening. That system is running underneath the covers at this very moment. not hard. There is almost nothing to shed on a still night in a quiet room. But it is there, spread across the whole surface of the body, from the top of the scalp down to the soles of the feet, complete and unhurried. Millions of small openings, quiet, entirely ready for a day that asks something serious of them. Nobody was ever taught how to do it, and nobody has ever had to think about it. It cannot be switched on, and it cannot be switched off, which is probably the highest compliment a piece of machinery can be paid. It does not ask for attention, and it never has in a million years of faithful service. That is the peace worth carrying down into sleep. Your body did not follow you here. It was finished a long time before, in a warmer country, and it has been carried ever since without alteration in any part that matters. You are the one who travelled. North and east, over mountains and across cold water, into weather that had every reason to turn the whole project back at the door and send it home again. The bare skin bought the hot open day, which was an extraordinary thing to own. The seams of those first coverings bought all the rest of the map, and somewhere impossibly far back, a person drew something soft across their shoulders and slept warm for the first time in the history of the world. They had no idea whatsoever that they were beginning anything. They were cold, and then they were a little less cold, and then they slept, and in the morning they probably thought nothing more about it. That is all it was. You are doing the same thing tonight, in a warm room with better materials and the identical intention. The gesture has not changed at all. All over the dark side of the world, at this exact hour, other people are arranging precisely this same thing. The same small pocket of held air, the same ancient skin underneath it, the same quiet arithmetic of warmth being made and warmth being kept. It is one of the least remarkable things our species does, and one of the strangest, and it goes almost entirely unmentioned. So let the room settle now. Feel the weight of the covers. It is not much weight. It is just enough to tell your skin where the edge of the warm air is. Your shoulders are warm, and your feet are on their way. The air above the covers is cooler than the air held beneath them, and that is exactly the arrangement a body prefers when it is getting ready for sleep. Warm under. Cool above. You have been setting yourself up that way your whole life, without ever once deciding to. The temperature inside is sliding down a fraction now, the way it does most nights around this hour. That small drop is part of falling asleep. Your skin is the thing that does it. It widens the vessels near the surface and eases a little warmth out into the room, and the covers catch most of that warmth and quietly hand it back. The old system and the new one, settling with one another over one sleeping body in the dark. Nothing here needs fixing. Nothing here needs hurrying. The room is quiet. The house has finished making its evening sounds. Breathing has gone long and even, without anybody arranging it. Under the blanket, your skin is warm. It is doing what it has done for 1,000,000 years, without ever being asked. An animal from a hot country, sleeping in a borrowed climate, and doing it beautifully. Your shoulders are heavy now. Your hands have gone still. The warmth is holding. Sleep is close. It is already reaching you. Warm skin, quiet room. Rest now.